As we wrap up 2024, I want to share my top 10 takeaways that have made a lasting impact. Let's dive in.
If you're eating a diet high in ultra-processed foods, even if you don't gain weight, you're still exposed to all the increased risks of dementia, anxiety, depression, inflammatory bowel disease, and on and on and on.
Broader diet is consistent with healthier microbiome, with better brain health. Picky eaters seem to be at greater risk for adverse mental health.
Good friends make you feel good when you leave them. Good friends leave you feeling inspired. They leave you feeling confident. When I hang out with my close friends, I don't care what we're talking about. When I leave, I'm on a high.
Let yourself go on a run. Let yourself look up an old friend without it being part of some big new project of life transformation. Then you have spent 10 minutes of your finite time on the planet doing something that you love.
Stress is just a moment where your brain has predicted that there's a big metabolic outlay and there's about to be a big withdrawal from your body budget.
If you feel like you have all of these things and you're moving forward in all of these things, you are living at your highest level of well-being in life.
Nothing is more influential than exercise. It affects HDLs, it affects LDLs, it affects triglycerides, blood glucose, fasting insulin levels.
One of the consequences of trauma is that it can disrupt your blood sugar.
So it's a great directive for actually improving your decision making is to write out your decision before you make it.
You can use compassionate imagery to start to stimulate compassion systems in your brain and in your body.
We don't need to shut our hearts down because self-compassion allows us to keep our hearts open to ourselves and the world.
We want to make sure these conversations get to as many people as possible. By following this show and leaving a review, you can help these conversations reach the people they need to. If you send a screenshot of your follow and review to @SarahAnnMacklin, I'll pick 3 of you to come down to the studio to meet me and the guest I'm interviewing and watch the recording live. In your email and message to me, don't forget to also let me know who you'd like to see on the show. Welcome to my first solo episode. This year has been full of personal growth and incredible live well, be well conversations. I've had the privilege of speaking with some of the brightest minds, and reflecting on their insights has been truly therapeutic. So as 2024 wraps up, I want to share my top 10 takeaways that has made a lasting impact. I hope these insights resonate with you and give you something to carry into the new year. Let's go. Chris Van Talken's insights on ultra-processed foods were a wake-up call. These foods are engineered to bypass your natural hunger signals, making it easy to overeat. He highlighted how energy-dense, soft foods require little chewing and digesting, tricking us into consuming far too much and more than we need. The solution is simple but powerful. Stick to whole, unprocessed foods. It might not always be easy, but it's a step towards better health. And as Chris puts it, eat like your ancestors, not your algorithms.
There are lots of sandwiches in Pret that are over 500 calories.
Yeah.
You will never, ever leave a quarter of a sandwich behind. You will be licking out every single last crumb. And that's because it's been designed. So if you're struggling with the food, the sort of strapline of the book is, it isn't you, it's the food. So how does it do it? What's the mechanism? We actually understand quite a lot about how the food does this. And we've got really good studies going back to the 90s that when food is soft and when it's energy dense, that those are 2 really important properties to drive excess consumption. So ultra-processed food, simply because it has been so physically mangled, chemically, thermally, and physically, it's been actually processed, very small particle size. This sandwich feels like it's got a bit of texture, but you can compare this to if you made this with rye bread and chunks of tuna and bigger bits of cucumber, it'd take you twice as long to eat.
That's a good point, actually.
The energy density is partly because the food is dry. Now, there is some illusions of moisture in a lot of the products that comes from using sugars and oils, but it's generally bone dry because water is expensive to ship around and water reduces shelf life. So what you want is very, very dry food, so the food has a nearly infinite shelf life. What you want is to be able to make your mince pie, say, in February for next Christmas, because it's going to take the factory a long time to make, the 20 million that you need to produce. So the energy density and the softness mean you consume calories, you swallow them at a rate that your body has not evolved to keep up with. Real food, even a fatty marbled steak, A, you have to cut it and chew it, and B, steaks are full of water. They're actually quite low energy density, even if they're very fatty. So the second thing is the food tells you a series of lies. So whether it's the non-nutritive sweeteners or the flavor enhancers or the gums replacing the fat, there are lots of things that signals arrive in your mouth that then the nutrition doesn't deliver. So we understand this best with the artificial sweeteners or the non-nutritive sweeteners. It doesn't matter if they're natural. You don't taste sweet in your mouth, right? You don't have sweet detectors on your tongue because it's fun. You have it to signal to the inside of your body, organs like your pancreas, that refined sugar is on its way. And so you better release insulin and other hormones to deal with the refined sugar. And this is why we have a sweet taste, because humans are quite good at eating sugar. Now, if you put sweet taste on the tongue and the sugar never arrives, we used to think that would then boost your insulin, lower your blood sugar, and then you'd eat more sugar elsewhere. So if you're drinking a Diet Cola, you'd eat more fries. It seems from a really big paper published last summer, most of the artificial sweeteners put your blood sugar up. So we think this is part of a stress response. If you put sweet on the tongue and the sugar never arrives, this is incredibly confusing for your body. For millions of years, if you put sweet taste on the tongue, sugar then arrives in the body, honey or whatever. So the lies seem to be important. Flavoring, coloring, marketing is a big part of excess consumption. But it's not so much about any one of the ingredients or properties. It's the whole gestalt, the entire, every single aspect of the food has been optimized. So you can't really tease it apart. It's like going, why are we all addicted to our phones? Are you addicted to your phone because of its camera, or it's the apps, or is it the sleek feel, or the buttons, or the swipey?
It's the ping of a message, the dopamine hit that you get.
But it's all of it, isn't it? It's every aspect is just designed, from the acoustic of the ping to your relationship with the brand. So you can't tease it apart. And that's a really important thing for understanding why you can't really reformulate ultra-processed food. So we see this, the best example is with a Diet Cola. I mean, Diet Cola is like the ultimate solution, isn't it? It's a perfect fix. They're basically indistinguishable, 0 calories. Why aren't diet drinks solving at least the proportion of the obesity epidemic that's due to soft drinks? They're just not. And we've massively increased our consumption. The non-nutritive sweeteners are probably a bit better than sugar. I mean, my colleagues who I really trust would all say that. I'm a bit on the fence about it, but they're probably not much worse. And yet they really aren't solving the problem. So even the best reformulation doesn't work. That's why we think that to change population health, we have to switch people away from an industrial diet back to sort of eating real food, traditional food. What's really important for people listening who live at what we, in a horrible way, call a healthy weight, is if you're eating a diet high in ultra-processed foods, even if you don't gain weight, you're still exposed to all the increased risks of dementia, anxiety, depression, inflammatory bowel disease, and on and on and on. So this is not a discussion that's about weight. And I think wresting diet-related disease away from an obesity discussion is really important. And you do that very, very kind of skillfully.
One of my favourite guests returned to the show for 2 episodes of Live Well Be Well this year. Dr. William Lee showed me how food affects not just our bodies, but also our emotional well-being. A varied, colourful diet can reduce anxiety and depression by supporting brain health and reducing inflammation. The takeaway is that food is mood, and what's on your plate can literally shape how you feel. Adding more variety and colour to your meals is a proactive step towards better mental health and emotional well-being. So I wanted to start off by asking the question, can being a picky eater increase our risk of mental health conditions?
Great question. This was prompted, I think, from this article I sent you.
Yeah,
that was published in this very prestigious journal, new journal, Nature Mental Health. Nature being a super credible, important journal for scientific research, discovery research. And in this group, that publication research, it was 187,000 people studied by a group from China and the UK. And they were looking at the UK Biobank. This is this massive population-based study tracked over decades, 187,000 people. And what was clever about this research was that they were looking at self-identified food preferences. What did you eat? How picky are you? What do you prefer? They had things like ketchup and curries and vegetables and meats, and offered it up so that the respondents could choose what they enjoyed eating, what they liked eating on paper, and then queried them in terms of their mental health symptoms so they could profile them. They also looked at their physical health. They had blood markers like inflammatory markers like CRP. And then what they also did is they scanned their brains, which I think is really remarkable. They actually did brain scans so they could actually look at brain structure. So here you have behavior, preference, blood markers, and brain structure. That's what made it a discovery paper. And the headline that came out in the media from this is that picky eaters seem to be at greater risk for adverse mental health, right? And it's a surprise because if you were to be and actually the subtypes like vegetarians don't do as well or more prone to anxiety than meat eaters. Those are sort of the clickbait titles. The reality is that this study was most significant because of its design, large population, doing imaging, and then looking at blood markers, and then examining other parameters for health, including mental health, and then looking at the connection between dietary choices. They had 4 different groups of people they were looking at, or 4 different preference groups. And what I would tell you that the things that how I interpret it as a scientist and as a physician who does research, I would say it did show that people who are more limited in their food preferences associated with different brain structure,
Wow.
different blood markers. And yes, there was an association with more vulnerability, let's say to anxiety, depression, and some of these negative mental health outcomes that the study was looking at. However, it was not cause and effect. Is it your choosiness and then your diet that actually led to the brain changes and mental health outcomes? I don't think you can say that.
No.
In fact, I will tell you that if you took a look at the vegetarians in that study, the more limited eaters, the pickier was not, they did not use the word picky. All right, that's sort of the interpretive for the public way of describing the more narrow band eaters. What they found is that if you were eating mostly vegetarian type of cuisine, your blood markers had lower inflammation. You had less C-reactive protein, which is actually beneficial. You have less inflammation markers. They also showed that there were changes in the brain, but there was no real assignment of which parts of the brain had implications for mental health. In other words, they didn't say it activated the depression center in the brain. It was more that compared to other groups, different parts of the brains were activated differently. Now, did people who have anxiety or depression have those structural changes to begin with? That might be a closer association. And then the connection between food preference might be influenced by whether they're feeling anxious or whether they're feeling depressed. Importantly, in this study, and this is this is actually the real thing you're going to need to know about this study, they did not actually examine or make the people in the study eat the food that they preferred. So it was really a box check. So just because you might like Brussels sprouts and I don't like Brussels sprouts doesn't mean that if we were a part of that study, that our mental health outcomes was due to the liking or not liking of a particular food type. It was just a stated preference. And I think that, the God is always in the detail when it comes to important research papers. And that's why I think the public's appetite to have a quick breakthrough or a quick surprise, shocking surprise, is usually not the way that we in science interpret it. What was really amazing about this paper is the fact that you can even get people to fill out a form, give their blood,
187,000.
and then actually have their brain scanned. right? Like that's quite remarkable. And so if you read the end of this paper, it basically says this sets up for future research that's more specific, that has a tighter design, that looks for cause and effect. And I think that this is where we're going to be going. And that's the really exciting part about this.
It's really exciting. I guess and again, there's no cause and effect because it's not a random control placebo trial, but RCT. But what it is saying is actually, I guess, a more diverse and balanced diet at the end of the day is probably the best one for our health, which I would say is probably in line with what you think as well. Someone that's not too restrictive in how they're eating. And I know we use the word picky, but I would think about it more as restrictive. And that doesn't mean you have to be a restrictive vegetarian. It just means that you're only eating a certain limited amount of foods. And would you agree with that?
100%. So here's two different ways to look at the same thing. Number one, if you actually have a broader palate, a more diverse acceptance or preferences for your food, you're going to be eating more stuff, whether it is vegetable only or plant-based only, or whether it includes other healthy foods that would include animal sources of protein, fish, poultry, meat. The more we do know that the more diverse your diet, even if you're including meat, you'll actually have a more diverse microbiome. The more diverse your gut microbiome, meaning if you look at the microbiome, 40 trillion bacteria as a neighborhood that happens to be located in your gut, specifically in the cecum, which is part of your large bowel. The more diverse the neighborhood, the more healthy that neighborhood is. The less diverse, meaning if everybody's the same, it's kind of like being in a small island community where everybody's related to one another, same race, same
genetics,
gender, same everything. I'll put it all together. That doesn't make for a good long-term healthy neighborhood, nor does it actually make for a good healthy long-term gut microbiome. Now we know that gut microbiome does all kinds of things: gut brain, gut liver, gut immune system. They're all interconnected. So broader diet is consistent with healthier microbiome, consistent with better brain health.
I'm so pleased to partner with Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to help entrepreneurs stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage your audience, and sell anything from products to content all in one place. I've been using Squarespace since day one because it's accessible and it looks professional, even for a tech phobe like me. Squarespace gives you all the tools to create and sell your own online courses. I launched my own Inner Circle membership last year using their platform. You can upload videos, customize your layouts, and add a paywall to monetize your content. Now, if you're looking to grow your business, the email campaigns feature is a game changer. It allows you to create targeted email campaigns, engage your community, drive sales, and track success with built-in analytics. Head to squarespace.com/livewell for your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LIVEWELL for 10% off a website or domain. Simon Sinek's 8-minute rule changed the way I think about reaching out to my friends, and also how my friends reach out to me. Friendship has been a really sacred and important thing for me this year. It's easy to feel like a burden when you need support, but knowing that a friend can give you just 8 minutes can make all the difference. Most people can step out of a meeting or drop an email for 8 minutes just to simply listen. And this simple rule can strengthen your friendships and connections, reminding you that it's okay to ask for help when you need it. Until this year, I always struggled with reaching out to my friends, but this rule has been a complete game changer.
I was at a friend of mine's house for dinner, one of my best friends, and we were just catching up and haven't talked to her in a couple weeks. And she told me how her last week was really taxing and difficult. And she's fine now. She's good, but like it was really, really a rough week. And I got kind of mad. We're supposed to be these close friends who rely on each other and talk to each other. And I sort of got kind of upset. And I said, well, why didn't you call me? How dare you deny me the honor, right?
Well, this is what one of my friends said to me. when I was going through what I was going through a couple of months ago, and I didn't call her, and we went for dinner, and she asked me, "How are you?" And I told her, and the anger was like, "How long has this happened?
Yeah.
When did this happen?
By the way, if your friend got
me?"
angry, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing, right? And the fact that they're making it about themselves, not really. It's a good thing. So anyway, I got really kind of pissed off. And I was like, why didn't you call me? Like, we're supposed to be close friends. You tell me we're such good friends all the time, and like, you don't call me in the time of need? And she said, I did. I'm like, you did not. She goes, I texted you multiple times. I'm like, you absolutely didn't. Pull out my phone. I start scrolling through last week's text from her. And it says, what are you up to? Hey, want to get dinner? I'm like, you mean these texts? She goes, yeah. I'm like, how do I know that's a call for help? That sounds like every other text you've ever sent me. Because I didn't reply immediately to, hey, like, how do I know that that's a call for help? And she told me that she read this article where if we can give somebody who's in a place of struggle or difficulty, if we can give them simply 8 minutes, we don't have to be there like for an hour or solve their problems, but if we can be there for them for 8 minutes, that time allows them to feel not alone. And that we can revisit and come back later with more time, obviously. But all we need to do is give someone 8 minutes. So my friend and I came up with this code word, which is if you're calling for help and it's different from every other time, the text is, do you have 8 minutes? And do you have 8 minutes means this is
serious.
This is game time. Hopefully you don't get them very often, right? And anyone can step out of a meeting for 8 minutes. And you don't have to be there for the exhaustive download. Do you have 8 minutes? Yes. I just need to tell you what I'm going through. I hear you. I love you. I love you. I love you. You're not alone. You're not alone. I'll call you. I'll call you later tonight. Okay? I love you. You're not alone. Don't worry. We'll get through this together. Is all it really requires for somebody to be okay, or to hold on. And so to go back to how friendships change, when I started talking about this 8-minute rule publicly, like I had friends texting me, like, do you have 8 minutes? Like too many friends, right? And some of them I'm like, nah, like I like you. We hang out. You're not an 8-minute friend for me, And I wrote back to one of them, I think I called because I thought it was insensitive to, but I called and said, hey, listen, you're going through something. You should call one of your better friends. I adore you. You're great. We hang out, but we're not we don't have that kind of friendship, because it would be emotionally taxing for me to give that amount of energy for someone. I'm not a therapist. It's not my job to be there for everyone in their time of need, and I think that's where some people make the mistake that they feel like they have to martyr themselves. Like that they are the ones that have to be there for everybody. You'll have nothing left for the people you really care about, and you'll definitely have nothing left for yourself.
Well, that's the big part, right?
And so this is why I think friendships have to have boundaries. Some have none, and some have some. And I think one of the things that we owe it to people. And by the way, the weird thing is none of them were upset because they all know. Everybody knows this is not the deepest friendship in the world. And just because you ask me for 8 minutes, doesn't mean I have to be there.
Yeah, totally.
It's not cold. It's realistic. And by the way, you should go and ask somebody who loves you to death and who knows you inside and out and will give up their night to come and sit in bed with you and be depressed with you and get in the mud with you. They're the
people, right?
Don't deny them the honor of being your friend. Why would you call me? There's no honor in this for me. It's literally feels like charity. Like go talk or therapy.
Yeah.
So go like, and I don't know what, but maybe there's embarrassment. I don't know what it is, but
or maybe they don't have friends. I know that sounds really left bar there, but I actually think some people might struggle to think, well, do I have enough friends on my hand to call?
And
Who
I think,
are they?
And I think then I've had this conversation with people. And by the way, I've been there. And start with one. Start with somebody who, kind of makes you feel good, kind of makes you feel alive. When you leave them, you're in a good mood. Like, good friends make you feel good when you leave them. Good friends leave you feeling inspired. They leave you feeling confident. They leave you feel like when I hang out with my close friends, like, I don't care what we're talking about. It could be easy. It could be difficult. It could be funny. It could be sad. I literally, the conversation matters zero. It could be personal. It could be impersonal. It could be emotional. It could be factual. It doesn't matter. When I leave, like, I'm on a high. I feel better about myself. I feel like
you feel you.
I feel me, and I want to feel like that as much as possible. And so, in relationships, have you met people who, they keep their walls a mile high and a foot thick?
Absolutely.
And the reason they do is they say, well, I don't want to get hurt.
It's most English people.
Yeah, probably. The rationale is I don't want to get hurt.
Yeah.
And the uncomfortable truth is, if you're not willing to get hurt, if you're not open to being hurt,
you will never know what it feels
you will
like.
never know, you will never be loved, and you will never fall in love. And that's part of the risk. And is it better to never be hurt and never fall in love? Or is it better to have loved and lost? Or to put yourself out there only to be slightly embarrassed or humiliated? And the good news is wounds heal. But when we build walls around ourselves, we're creating prisons. When you build a wall around yourself for fear of being hurt, you're actually not protecting yourself from the outside. That's actually not what's happening. What you're doing is disallowing magic to come in. And you build a prison around yourself, and you are now alone. And loneliness is the single most dangerous thing that can happen to a social animal like a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. And it's selfish because you deny other people the honor of being your friend. And so there is some accountability. If you have no friends, which may be true, my question would be, are you a friend to anyone? And here's how you solve that problem. Because it's too difficult, especially if you're unpracticed in being a friend, right? Because it does take practice. It's work. Service is always the answer. So Alcoholics Anonymous has a 12-step program, and they know from years and years and years, decades of doing this, that most of us have heard of the first step, admitting you have a problem. Maybe it's me. And the Alcoholics Anonymous knows, or any 12-step program knows, that if you master 11 steps, but not the 12th, you're probably going to succumb to the disease. But if you master the 12th step, you're more likely to beat the disease. The 12th step is to help another alcoholic. Service. And so if you're struggling with something, don't try and fix it. Help somebody who's struggling with the same thing. So if you're struggling to make friends, help someone else make a friend. It is the most rewarding thing in the world.
As a nutritionist, one of the most common questions that I get asked is coffee good or bad for you? Yes, coffee is good for you, but the impact of the health benefits all comes down to how the coffee is sourced and made. What's really important to consider when choosing your coffee is knowing that not all coffee is created equally. I came across Exhale Coffee by Dr. Rupi, who oversaw 9 independent lab tests to ensure the coffee is sourced to maximize the polyphenol content. This is a potent antioxidant with anti-inflammatory properties to support overall health. Switching to a high polyphenol coffee like Exhale is also fantastic for your gut health and your brain health, because research has shown that these specific components may have a real impact on our immune response. It could even help support your oral microbiome when drinking up to 2 to 3 cups a day. But over 5 a day has been shown to have detrimental effects. Personally, I love to have my coffee an hour after waking up to allow my body to use its own natural energy resources within the first hour and to align with my circadian rhythm. What I also love about Excel coffee is that it's also soil certification organic certified, which means that it's free from mytoxins, pesticides, and molds. Now, if you want to give your mornings a new routine and try Excel coffee, then head to www.excelcoffee.com/Sarah to get your free trial sent to you. Oliver Berkman's advice was a game changer for self-care. He shared the power of dedicating just 10 minutes a day to doing something you enjoy. No matter how busy life gets, giving yourself just 10 minutes for you that you want to do, not something that you have to do, can create more joy and balance. It's a small act, but it can make a big impact. This takeaway reminded me that self-care doesn't have to be time-consuming to be effective. And I loved just how many of you messaged me after the episode about this snippet too. Because sometimes all we need is simply reminding.
So I think one thing that I think has been a really important thing for me is what I think of as morning pages, but really any kind of journaling, any kind of free-form journaling. So I'm talking about spending 30, 40 minutes almost every morning writing 3 sides of a narrow ruled, people always want to know the details, 3 sides of a narrow ruled hardback notebook, but none of that is important. The important part is that you put some kind of temporal frame around it and just write freely in that time for no audience other than yourself. And for me, that is a powerful way to sort of ease into some of these ways of thinking and being. The jury is out in my mind as to how far that is a sort of a path to embodiment, given that it is sort of inherently language-based and thought-based. But I do think that there's something very powerful about just saying to yourself, I'm going to write without stopping, not super fast or anything, but just, I'm not going to only write something when I know what it is I want to write. I'm just going to let the pen move and see what comes. And that is in itself, obviously, if you do it, well, even if you type it, but especially if you do it longhand, I think that is a practice that is sort of physical as much as it is anything else. And I've found that really useful. However, I think that there is also, this is the second part of my answer, there is a temptation to be like, okay, this sounds useful and interesting. So what are the habits that I need to develop in order to be like that? And part of what I'm taking aim at in a way is that whole attitude that says, what are the habits that I first need to put in place before I can be more sort of fully absorbed and enlivened by my own life? And that can very easily lead right back into the same problem of like, well, okay, for the next few months, I'm going to work on like becoming this and meditating every day. And then finally, maybe I'll be allowed to just sort of enjoy life. So what I always say instead is like, the thing that you should do is, identify something in your life that in your heart you want to have more of in your life. So it could be a aspect of your work that you want to focus on more. It could be a creative project or a hobby. It could be a relationship you know you would like to be nurturing but you haven't been doing. It could be a recreational activity. And just actually do 10 minutes of that today. Like actually sweep away all this kind of like, what am I going to put in place so that I can do these things? And just do that thing, however badly, however unconfidently, with however little certainty that you're ever going to come back and do it again, right? Not once today and then every day for the rest of your life, but just once. And I think there's something in that willingness to just let yourself go on a run, let yourself look up an old friend, let yourself do some drawing, whatever. I'm just picking examples at random, without it being part of some big new project of life transformation, but just doing it today, or, if you're listening or watching late at night, then tomorrow is okay, but not in 3 weeks' time. And if that means putting something else to one side, then that's what it means. And if it means you can only afford to do it for 10 minutes because of all the other things you've got to do, then fine. It's like constantly bringing down that standard that needs to be met in order to let yourself do something that makes you feel more alive.
That reminds me of a friend actually that said to me last week, she was an avid reader and she I'd stop reading. So she made a promise to herself that every day for 10 minutes, I'm just going to read a book. Just 10 minutes. That's all I'm going to do. Doesn't matter where I am, but I want to just read a book. And that was one thing that she wanted to do. So she started just with 10 minutes.
Yeah. And that's great. And the only thing I would say that is in any way objecting to it is like, if that even feels like too much, forget the everyday. It's like 10 minutes today. Don't worry if there's another, and then you might find that you do it the next day and the next day and the next day. Great. But like, even that bar you don't have to reach. You have to read for 10 minutes once. And then you have spent 10 minutes of your finite time on the planet doing something that you love. And that matters in and of itself.
One of my biggest realizations this year came from neuroscientist Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She challenged the traditional view of stress, describing to me that the fight or flight response is too binary. Instead, stress is your brain managing energy demands. The takeaway? Cortisol isn't just the stress hormone, it regulates energy. Reducing stress is about properly fueling your body as much as it is about practicing mindfulness. So, stress isn't your enemy, it's actually a signal. Listen to it, understand it, and adjust it accordingly. So we talk a lot about cortisol, and a lot of people say this is the stress hormone, and we will then get a fight and flight response. So this is like a very big conversation that's been going on now for like the last 5 years. Tell us why that's incorrect.
Well, first of all, cortisol is a hormone that your brain directs your adrenal glands to secrete into the bloodstream. Its main effect is to help cells metabolize glucose quickly and efficiently. So you're going to have a cortisol release. There's always cortisol in your blood, but you're going to have more cortisol in your blood in moments where your brain is predicting that there's going to be a big metabolic outlay. So when is that going to happen? That's going to happen right before you drag your ass out of bed in the morning. Like right before you get up out of bed, you're going to have a cortisol surge. Whether or not you're worrying about what's happening in the day, like you could be feeling very pleasant and really looking forward to your day, and you will still have a cortisol surge to get out of bed. You're going to have a cortisol surge before you exercise. You're going to have a cortisol surge whenever your brain is predicting that there's a big metabolic outlay. So what is stress? Stress is your brain predicting that there's a big metabolic outlay. Basically, cortisol, its job is to regulate glucose metabolism. It's part of the regulatory system of glucose metabolism. It's not specific to those moments that when you feel like crap. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is stress is just a moment where your brain has predicted that there's a big metabolic outlay and there's about to be a big withdrawal from your body budget. That's all stress is. It's nothing more than that. So that can happen when, there are scientists who talk about good stress and bad stress. Good stress is when your brain predicts there's a big metabolic outlay, and there is a big metabolic outlay, like when you exercise or when you go to write a test, or those are moments of good stress because your brain has made a prediction. The prediction is correct. You do the spending and then you replenish what you spend. If you have a life like that, it's full of stress, but it's good stress. It's what scientists would call good stress. The problem happens when your brain starts to mispredict. If your brain is predicting a big metabolic outlay, like I have to go into a meeting and deal with this person who I dislike and I don't trust. And so I have to pay more attention and it's going to be unpleasant, right? Or, I have to go to the doctor and I have to have a painful medical procedure, or, and then it turns out, it's not really that. So when you don't anticipate something requiring a big metabolic outlay, and it does, in moments where your brain is mispredicting, it will secrete, there'll be a flush of cortisol and it won't necessarily be used, or it will come too late. When that happens, and if that happens persistently, then you have cortisol dysregulation, which means if you're flush with cortisol all the time, and most of the time you don't need it, the cells become insensitive to cortisol, and then they can't utilize it as well when they do need it. And now you have a metabolic dysregulation that is system-wide. So that's just one example, but basically that's the first piece of answering your question. Stress is a moment where the brain has predicted there is a big effort that's required. That's it. And if you fail, if there really is a big effort and you fail to replenish what you spend, that's going to have lasting effects, right? If it over time, if that continues to happen. If you're mispredicting and you're not learning, that's going to have effects over time. That's the first piece. The second piece is there are no fight or flight circuits in your brain. Okay. We just published a paper a couple of months ago showing that this was the case. The circuits in your brain that are for fight or flight, and I put that in like scare quotes or whatever, are really circuits for regulating your body. Okay. They're there and they're engaged all the time. They're engaged when you're doing really simple things. Like we put people in a really powerful magnet so we could image their brains, really powerful, so we could see deep into the small subcortical areas of the brain. And we had people do a task that's easier than remembering a phone number. Basically, we'd show them, it's called an N-back task. It's a memory task. We show them a letter like N, the letter N for Nancy, N. And then on the next few seconds later, we show them another letter, like the letter P. And we say, same or different. Those two letters are different. And then we show them another letter a couple of seconds later. Maybe it's an F for Fred. Same or different? Different. Then we show them another F. Same or different? The same. And that's the task. And they also did a harder version of the task where they had to keep track of the letter 3 trials back. Okay. So that's a harder task. But even on this really simple task, which we'd call a 1 back, you're only remembering 1 trial back. So like a couple of seconds ago, are you seeing the same thing as you saw a couple of seconds ago? Yes or no? Way easier than remembering a phone number. We saw modulation in the areas where those circuits are. Those circuits are not for fight or flight. They're driven hard when the brain predicts that you need to withdraw and flee, or when you need to step up and fight and confront. Those circuits are driven hard in those moments because those are effortful moments. But those circuits are not specific to those moments. They are always working all the time because they're part of the machinery that the brain is using to regulate your cardiovascular system, your respiratory system, your metabolism, and so on and so forth.
So why did that come up? Why has fight and flight been such a used term if now we're seeing that actually it doesn't exist?
Well, it's still I didn't say it doesn't. I didn't say fight and flight don't exist. They exist as behaviors, but they don't have dedicated circuits. People are not exhausted because their fight and flight circuits are overworked. They're exhausted because they're swimming in a sea of uncertainty where they can't predict very well. And probably they're suffering from body budgeting deficits that they're unaware of. Because modern life is, if I were going to architect a system that would bankrupt people metabolically, it would be the one that we live in, you know? I mean, if you just, in How Emotions Are Made, the first book that I published, I listed like a whole slew of things that on their own would be hard, but you add up all of those together and then add up additional things like for adolescents, their bodies are just harder to regulate because of hormones. The body is just harder to regulate in those moments, right? Or menopause, for example, or pregnancy. I mean, I think that, not everything, as I said, not everything is reducible to metabolism, but metabolism plays a role in everything that is mental. We're just not used to thinking of it that way. And so I think that I'll just say now that when I am having a moment where I feel like the world is ending, and I still have moments like that because I'm human, the first thing I ask myself is, did I get enough sleep? Not should I leave my husband, what do I do about my, boss who drives me up the fucking wall? No, I don't. The first thing I think is, do I need water? Did I get enough sleep? Do I need a hug from someone? Maybe I should also have a small piece of chocolate. I'm asking myself, I'm not eating for comfort. I'm like, right. When I feel really dragged out, the first thing I do is not eat, because it's easy to confuse fatigue from body budgeting problems, from a body budgeting deficit with hunger, because your brain is used to predicting that when you eat food, you'll have energy. And when you're feeling fatigued and dragged out, what you're feeling is a lack of energy. And right. So, but I have to ask myself, and I do literally, I've trained myself to check in on my stomach. Am I feeling lightheaded from not eating? No. Oh, in my stomach, is it grumbling? Oh no. Okay. Probably I'm just fatigued. And then the first thing I do is have a glass of ice water, because when you're dehydrated, if you're drinking coffee all day or soda all day or whatever, you can ironically still become dehydrated. And the first sign of dehydration is not thirst, but fatigue. And there's this research showing that if you drink enough water in the morning, in the afternoon, you're not falling asleep at your desk. But again, fatigue is not it doesn't have one cause. It has all these little causes with small effects on their own, but they add up to something big. So I think it's just a different way of anticipating and understanding your mood and the causes of your mood. And don't get me wrong, I've been divorced. I've had, my daughter was depressed. Every day is not a cakewalk in my life. Shit's happening all around the world. Sometimes I feel like it's on fire. Just like everybody else, there sometimes are things wrong in the world, and sometimes there are things wrong in my body, because I'm 61 years old almost. But the point is that I'm not thinking about everything as solely mental. I'm always thinking, well, all mental events, every moment of lived experience also has a physical basis. And I'm starting to also pay attention to that, because it gives you a set of tools for living.
Paul Brunson shared one of my favorite answers to Live Well, Be Well. Paul shared the 6 dimensions of well-being: growth, purpose, relationships, autonomy, mastery, and self-acceptance. Focusing on all of these areas creates a blueprint for a thriving life. This takeaway resonated with me deeply because it really aligns with the core of this podcast, that health and well-being are multifaceted. Too often, we can look at single verticals of health to make a great change, but Paul's description is a great reminder on what areas of these 6 dimensions that may need more of your attention as we enter into the new year.
Well, I'm super nerdy, so I'm going to give you a research study.
That fits so well with the show. We're so happy with that.
This is the nerdiest thing I can ever. What does that mean to you, Paul? Here's a research study to touch you.
This is what the data shows.
Are you familiar with Carol Riff's 6 dimensions of psychological well-being?
No. I had to really think about that then.
This is my answer then. That's my answer to Live Well, Be Well. Carol Riff in the 1980s studied all of the top theorists, Maslow, Erik Erikson, Viktor Frankl, right? All of these people, right? Carl Jung, all of these people. She studied all of them, and she looked at the intersection points of all of their philosophies around living a well life. And she created a dimension called 6 dimensions of psychological well-being, and said that if you feel like you have all of these things and you're moving forward in all of these things, you are living at your highest level of well-being in life. 1, personal growth. 2, you have purpose in life. 3, you have relationships with others. 4, you feel like you have autonomy, right? Control over your time. 5, you have what's called environmental mastery. You feel like where you live and your community serves you and you serve your community. And last but not least, very important, self-acceptance. You have accepted and you know all your pain, you know your demons, and you're okay with them. If you have all 6 of those, you're living a well life. You're living with well-being. And so to me, that's precisely what it means.
Mic drop. Could not agree more.
Yeah.
I mean, I obviously could agree. I mean, I'd be silly not to. But I mean, I hope everyone's written those down. I keep getting trailer. But do you know what, actually? When did she write that?
So that theory came out in the 80s, and it's not talked about. You know,
I wonder why.
You know what I think has happened is that, so when I was in finance, I was a researcher. So I'm a researcher. That's like my real profession under profession is I'm a researcher. And what I've seen is that most research is written by academics, and most academics write for other academics. And then on this side, you have a lot of people who have limited experience. So they have had one relationship, they've had one course, they've had one auntie over here that's had this, and then they espouse these ideas. And unfortunately, there's a big void. And so you've got like the anecdotal and you've got like the empirical, and those need to talk to each other. And what I'm trying to do, and like with my book and what I'm trying to do with whenever I'm on a podcast, is I'm trying to bridge that gap to say, you know what, both are good. Learned experience is very important, but this academic stuff is very important as well. Let's bridge the gap.
Let's bring it together and communicate about it. I picked this snippet as it's a really nice reminder as we start thinking about healthy choices for 2025. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon highlighted the importance of building muscle for longevity. Skeletal muscle is the key to how your body burns energy, regulates blood sugar, and supports overall health. Simple exercises like air squats or using resistance bands after meals can boost your metabolic health. Think of a muscle as your body's metabolic engine. The more you build and maintain it, the better your body functions as you age. It's a simple but powerful way to stay younger and healthier for longer. And you really don't need to hammer the weights in the gym to get started. This also relates really well to my episode that I recently recorded with Dr. Chris Palmer, who believes that our poor metabolism is also the link to our poor mental health.
When you are exercising skeletal muscle, you are increasing flux. You are increasing this utilization of glucose. You are no longer, it's like a swimming pool or a pond. You are emptying the pond, you're filtering the pond. We know what happens when a pond gets stagnant, that eventually a pond gets full, has lots of bacteria, it's super gross. Then there's nowhere for the water to go. The water ends up spilling all over. And that's what happens to skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle no longer, if you think about it like a pond, no longer has clear water. It becomes very murky. And the same thing happens to skeletal muscle. So when an individual is going to exercise, in my mind, they are thinking about the mind-muscle connection. They are thinking about the action that they are taking to complete the task at hand. They are thinking that they are getting better at the physicality of life because we exist within this plane. We must be able to navigate within it. Number 2, they know that they are improving their metabolic efficiency. They are getting glucose into the cells. They are also managing the health of their mitochondria, which is related to energy and ATP production, all of which decline as we age. So in essence, we are talking about this elixir of longevity, which is truly exercise. The influence of exercise has a whole body impact on all of the homeostatic mechanisms. Nothing is more influential than exercise. It affects HDLs, it affects LDLs, it affects triglycerides, blood glucose, fasting insulin levels. A single bout of exercise will have lasting effects. Obviously, it is cumulative over time, but one single bout of exercise will have effects. I talk about this in the book that, for example, let's say you had a continuous glucose monitor on and you ate a big lunch and there was a lot of carbohydrates. Let's say you were to actually do that. You will see blood sugar go down in real time as soon as you get up and move, do 10 air squats.
Yeah. Do you know what? Dr. Mindy talked about this when she came onto the show, actually, about just actually moving and doing even squats at home post-eating. And actually so much about us now, I guess, is maybe eating at our desks, eating dinner in front of the TV, and just these even simple things of moving the body is such a fantastic response, especially to a high carbohydrate meal, as you just said. My conversation with Dr. Sarah Gottfried opened my eyes to the power of psilocybin in mental health. Psilocybin promotes neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections, helping break destructive thought patterns. The science shows real promise for treating depression and PTSD by addressing the root causes, not just the symptoms. But what struck me the most was how this natural compound can truly reset the brain, providing a path to a healthier mental health. It's a fascinating supplement that could really revolutionize mental health treatment.
There are classic psychedelics, things like mushrooms, ayahuasca, LSD, and then there are the medicines that we put in this category, such as MDMA, ketamine, that are not classic psychedelics. So MDMA is the most interesting. I like that comment from David Nutt. And I would agree with that. I would say MDMA is less dangerous than drinking alcohol. So randomized trial published in 2021 showing that for people who've got severe post-traumatic stress disorder, they did 2 to 3 treatments with MDMA-assisted therapy. And 2/3 of them no longer met criteria for PTSD. This is huge. This is huge. Why is this huge? Because we know that if you get the standard of care for post-traumatic stress disorder, which is talk therapy, sometimes trauma-informed, together with selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that the benefit, the efficacy is somewhere around 30%. It's abysmal. If I had known that about the therapy that I did in my 20s, I don't know that I would have done it.
And maybe why people give up. It may be why people give up, right?
I mean, it's so expensive. It takes so much time. It takes, some people are in therapy for decades and they're not getting better. And what we know is that the part of the brain that is involved in understanding trauma is different than the part of the brain that's involved in resolving trauma. So you can't think your way into resolving the trauma.
So that's the part of the brain. So that's why it's working, because what part of the brain is it activating?
The brainstem is involved. And this is newer research. So the cerebellum and the brainstem are involved. There's some other parts of the brain that are a little more complex that are involved in trauma. But it's, I think, understanding your trauma, knowing why your mother did what she did or your uncle did what he did, like that's not going to help you heal. So we need a different strategy. And we know that MDMA-assisted therapy is more than twice as effective as the standard of care. And then we had a new randomized trial that was published, another phase 3, in a more diverse patient population, so more than 50% non-white, people who had moderate to severe PTSD. They got MDMA-assisted therapy, and 71% of them resolved their symptoms. So this is incredibly effective. We expect that MDMA is going to get FDA approved in the United States sometime in the next year, and it's coming. So we need to know how to use it. It's very effective in terms of regulating the trauma signature in the body. And is that the case for people who have, I don't have post-traumatic stress disorder, but I've got subthreshold partial PTSD. And so MDMA-assisted therapy is really effective for me. So there's lots of different indications. As you described, there's studies looking at some of these medications like ketamine for eating disorders, using psilocybin mushrooms for depression and for end of life and for alcohol use disorder. So there's lots of different ways that these medications will be used. But what I get excited about is how regulating they are.
Shane Parrish introduced me to the concept of decision journaling. By writing down your major decisions, you can identify patterns, learn from your past choices, and make smarter calls in the future. Journaling isn't just for processing emotions. It's a tool for better decision making. And this practice can give you clarity and authenticity in your choices. Reflecting on your decisions regularly helps you grow and improve, making it a valuable habit to bring into the new year.
So if we think about learning, just to take it from learning to the decision journal, the way that we learn, I call it the learning loop. And the learning loop is we have an experience, we reflect on that experience, and the reflection is condensing the experience into an abstraction or compression, whatever you want to call it. And then we have an action. And so you have a loop. If I'm in this situation, I'll do this again. But it's taking an experience, condensing it, you're eliminating, the gigabytes, and you're just sort of making a text file almost. And then you know what to do next time if you're in the same situation. And the process of condensing that is super important. And that experience doesn't necessarily need to be a direct experience. This conversation is an experience between us. You can read a book and have an experience. You can go out and do something in the physical world and have an experience. And there are all different types of experiences. And there's better experiences and worse experiences for learning. When we make decisions, what we tend to do is forget what we knew at the time we made our decision. And we take the result of the decision. And if the result is what we wanted, we think we did the right thing. And if the result is not what we wanted, we sort of protect our ego. And by protecting our ego, we sort of avoid the difficult conversation with ourselves that we might have been wrong. And so the idea of a decision journal was twofold. One, the process of writing out what you're deciding is also the process of understanding what you're deciding. And so we have these invisible thoughts in our head. And my idea was to make the invisible visible. And how do I surface my thinking? So I take out a page of paper and I write down sort of all the things that are relevant. If you go to fs.blog/DJ for decision journal, you can find out the template we use. But the idea is more practical than that, which is, what am I thinking about this decision? What matters? What doesn't matter? What do I think is going to happen? What do I think are the key variables? You're basically just taking all of your thoughts and you're putting them on paper. And I often do this at night. And then I'll wake up and I'll read it in the morning. And then I'll be like, does this still make sense? And often it doesn't, right? Or this, it's sort of like, oh, here, you need more information here. So it's a great directive for actually improving your decision-making is to write out your decision before you make it. More importantly, later on, after the decision, you can chuck this away into a file. Every 3 months, you can go back to it and look through all of these old decisions. But now you have the benefit of knowing how they played out. Were you right? Were you wrong? But you can't convince yourself that you knew something you didn't at the time you made the decision. So often, you'll end up in a situation where you're right, but you're right for the wrong reasons. So were you actually right, or were you lucky? Or you end up looking back and going, oh, I'm making this consistent mistake. I'm always overconfident. Well, now I can adjust a little bit where I'm like, I should be a little less confident, a little more hesitant, maybe provide myself a bigger margin of safety on these things, or maybe enter into them more slowly as I can gain and gather more information. But what you're really doing is just giving yourself feedback. And it's a really hard conversation. I don't recommend people type it. I recommend people write it with their hand. Because if you type it, we have this mental thing where we sort of convince ourselves that we didn't type that, even though we did. Nobody else could have typed it. But looking at a screen, you're like, no, I didn't send that email. Who hasn't done that before? But if you're looking at your handwriting, it's really hard to convince you that you didn't write that. Yeah, exactly.
Compassion was a central theme for me this year, thanks to Dr. Kirsten Neff and Professor Paul Gilbert. They taught me that the compassion isn't just a nice idea, it's essential for our health and well-being. being kinder to ourselves and others can change our bodies on a cellular level. It reduces suffering and it improves our mental resilience. Now, cultivating compassion might not always be easy, but it's one of the most courageous and transformative things that we can do.
So the first thing then, as a series of practice, what we call using the body to support the mind, right? So we know that compassion is linked to the organization of the autonomic nervous system, particularly your parasympathetic. So there are breathing exercises.
That's your rest and digest,
yes,
just so people know.
That's rest and digest, it is, yes. So there are breathing exercises that you can do that will bring your sympathetic nervous system into balance. Now that's important because your your autonomic nervous system into balance, because your sympathetic system is basically your go get, go do. And so that speeds up your heart rate and tightens up your muscles and pumps oxygen around your body. So that's action. That's action person. And that action can be in anxiety or anger, but it can also be in joy and stuff like that. If you win the lottery and you're worth millions tomorrow, you will get pumped up. Although I have to tell you a story when I was explaining to people how positive things pump up the system. And this client of mine I was seeing at the time said to me, he was paranoid, bless him, said, "Oh, no, Dr. Gilbert, think of all the people that want to come and steal your money. It would be terrible." So he thought winning the lottery would be awful because it would make him victim to people wanting to steal his money.
Although very interestingly, on that note, I know you're going to finish this, but an interesting part of the compassion story is people that win the lottery aren't always necessarily happier.
No, not in the long term. No, that's absolutely right. They get the buzz of dopamine for a couple of days or weeks, but then actually, not necessarily, because the things that really make us happy are our relationships. It doesn't always help relationships. Okay, so that's, anyway, the sympathetic is, then you have a parasympathetic, and the parasympathetic is like the brakes on your car. It's the thing that will slow you down. So you imagine driving a car, and you can only control the speed of the car by coming on and off the brake, or maybe with the gears, but you didn't, on and off the accelerator, but you didn't have a brake. The parasympathetic system is very, very important, and that's why when we train the breathing exercises and certain other kinds of exercise, you're wanting to strengthen that parasympathetic, because that is the one that will hold you. So if you're going off on one with anger or anxiety, if you've got a reasonably strong parasympathetic system, you'll be able to switch into that, and that will hold you, okay, settles you. But if your parasympathetic system is relatively weak, which it can be if you've been traumatized or whatever, you're just off, and it's very difficult to calm down. So using the body to support the mind. We also know that the microbes in your gut can have an impact on your vagus, right? So the diet, lay off the sugars and all of that stuff.
Yep, that's essential for the vagus nerve that you just mentioned, which is obviously from the stem of the gut microbiome all the way up into the brain, to the hypothalamus. Yep.
Yeah, so there are lots of things. I won't go into all of them, but lots of things, sound things you can do. But you're using the body. You realize that you need a body to sort of help you and support you. The next thing is understanding the power of your mind to control your body, right? So the example that we give would be something like, if you imagine yourself just laying in bed, and then you start to have a worry come into your mind, and you worry, what happens in your body? Do you notice? You start to heart goes up a little bit, it starts to tense. Okay, let's switch that now and imagine that you're not worrying anymore, but you just suddenly remember somebody's really annoyed you, and you think, your face will tighten up. If we could take measures, all your facial muscles will be tightening up, your muscles tighten up. So when you get angry, muscles tighten up. When you get anxious, they tend to go loose. But supposing you were laying in bed and you had a sexual fantasy, and you can do this, you just try it, at home by yourself, 10 seconds. The key thing about the fantasy is notice how quickly you notice changes in sensations in parts of your body, because your mind will actually change the blood flow of your body like that, assuming everything's working okay. That's extraordinary, actually, when you start to think about it, that you can literally change blood flow and sensitivity in your nerves simply by creating an image. Yes, you can. The point is, will it work the same if I use compassion imagery? Yes, it does. you can use compassionate imagery to start to stimulate compassionate systems in your brain and in your body. It's no different at all. Instead of having to think of a sexual thing, you think of a compassion thing. And you will practice. And over time, if you practice compassionate imagery, those systems in your brain and body will start to strengthen up. So what are compassionate images? I thought you were going to answer that, weren't you?
Yep.
All right. So there are a couple of these. The first, I must confess, there was a client that really helped me with this, because the first is to imagine yourself as a compassionate being, and then walking around, and we have a cartoon on YouTube you can see called Compassion for Voices, if you're interested. That explains it a bit. So you practice imagining yourself. It's almost like an actor stepping into a role, and you practice the role. And if I was this, then how would I speak? How would I think? What would I do? However, many years ago, because we've been doing this a long time, we were doing this with a lady, and she said, "Oh, no, I can't do that. But I could imagine somebody being compassionate to me." I said, "Oh, okay." She said, "Well," she went off and she said, "I've got an image, and I spent time in a Buddhist monastery, and my image is a Buddha dressed as an earth goddess." She said, I can't really see it. I can't see a Buddha dressed in that way. I just have this sense of this being. And this being comes with real warmth and understanding and care for me. And that calms me down. She generated this compassionate image, and then she would learn to sort of call it when she needed it and speak to it, and so on and so on. And then actually, if you think about it, it's what religions do all the time, praying to God, you imagine God loving you and all that. So what you're doing is a little bit the same as a sexual fantasy. You're creating an interaction that's stimulating your body, but this is creating an interaction with the ideal compassionate other that you imagine yourself talking with or communicating with, the image of someone, or a mind, if you don't want a person, that has complete empathy for you and understanding for you and wisdom, and says, you've got a brain that you never chose. You are a human being coping with all this stuff. It's so hard. Let's go a step at a time. So your compassionate image has a way of being with you, and you practice relating to it in a way that you need to experience. And that in itself can be quite tricky for some people, but practicing imagining compassionate others being compassionate to you.
If you think of what burnout is at the broadest level, it's the inability to cope with the stress that's placed on us, whether that stress is external or internal, or often both, like you said, a combination of both. The self-criticism, we stress ourselves out by saying, you have to be perfect, you have to do more. But the culture also stresses us out by saying, you have to be perfect, you have to do more. And so when we can't cope with our stress, we tend to do three main things. First, we become exhausted. Like you in the extreme case, we just end up, we can't get out of bed, or we're hospitalized, or we're just totally flattened. The other thing we tend to do is we tend to blame ourselves for the fact that we can't hack it. And so we feel incompetent. So we internalize it. And then the other thing that's really interesting that happens is the fancy psychological term is depersonalization, but it basically means we just stop caring as much. We stop caring as much about other people or about our work or about ourselves. It's like we hide into it, we call into our little shell because it hurts too much to care because of all the stress. And so self-compassion helps prevent all of those. So the exhaustion, if you do care about yourself, you will realize actually, in order to care for myself, sometimes I do need to take a break or draw a boundary or say no. I need to value my needs as well as what just everyone else is telling me I need to do. So that valuing our own needs and that commitment to our own well-being means we don't do quite as much. So we don't become quite as exhausted. Okay, so that's one. And if we do get exhausted or we fail or we can't cope, we don't blame ourselves for it. We kind of realize it's the situation, or sometimes we contribute, but making mistakes doesn't mean that we are a mistake. So we can make mistakes or make wrong decisions, and we realize, okay, well, that's part of the human condition. What can I learn from this? So we don't feel so incompetent. So it reduces that one. And here's the really great thing. We don't need to shut our hearts down, because self-compassion allows us to keep our hearts open to ourselves and the world, right? We can still care, because our caring It's not like it's predicated in our humanity. Yeah, life is messy. It's for us, for other people. It's difficult. We aren't going to get things right. Sometimes we like to say the goal of practice is simply to be a compassionate mess. That doesn't mean that our goal is not to be a mess. Just to be clear, our goal is when the mess of life arises, and it will, because life's messy. Our goal is actually, how do I be compassionate to myself in the midst of the mess? And another way of saying that is, how do I keep my heart open? How do I keep my care alive, my warmth alive when things are so difficult? I just want to crawl into my little ball. And so that's why it's so powerful for preventing and also healing from burnout. Whether you're burnt out because your job's stressful, the stress of life, just the political situation, the world situation, the environmental situation, being a parent. I'm actually a special needs parent, and all parents can burn out, but it can be really especially intense if you're a special needs parent. There's so many stressors in life. And so to commit to showing up for ourselves in a kind, supportive, helpful way when the stress of life happens is just huge.
Thank you for joining me in reflecting on these insights for 2024. I hope the takeaways inspire you as much as they inspired me. And I would love to hear what resonated with you and what you guys would like to explore in 2025. If you have enjoyed Live Well, Be Well this year, it would be an amazing gift to me and my team if you could follow the show. This helps more people see it. Wishing you the most wonderful Christmas season and an amazing new year. See you in 2025.